caught off guard until I read the transcript, and I was like, man, my sense of time was completely warped. But I remember telling the midwife, I was like, I am either peeing and just have lost control of it at this point, or my water has broke. I could feel my baby's head. Like, I could feel the top of it. And that was so reassuring, you know, because you feel like you're just going to be doing this forever at some point. And I was like, oh my goodness, we are getting close. Like, so I'm a chiropractor, so I can picture, you know, the entire pelvis and how it's put together. And and it's literally what I was doing while I was giving birth, is I was imagining, you know, what my pelvis exactly was doing. And it was fascinating. You know, I truly hope that you do get that story that you want. And, you know, ours wasn't perfect. It was crazy and wild. But there's beauty in that, you know, that, you know, you don't want perfect. Perfect is kind of boring. I'm going to be telling the story of our first home birth that we did 2 years ago here in Nashville, Tennessee. And it's exciting to tell this story because we are coming up on our second home birth that we're going to be doing here soon. And I feel like when you're in third trimester, it's a really good time to reminisce on positive birth stories. And if you don't have any, or if this is your first time, then it's a really great time to read some very positive stories of birth, or watch some videos of positive birth stories. And you really have to watch, you know, where you're getting these stories from, and make sure that you are absorbing the right information and not letting the wrong stories into your brain, because, you know, going into birth, you want to be excited about it and optimistic, and to, you know, just assume that everything is going to go amazing. It's not going to go as planned. You know, we make a plan and then that plan falls apart, but it's going to go exactly the way that it's supposed to go. And that's really where my mind is right now, going into, you know, our upcoming birth. So our first home birth, it was on and off for 2 days. And that sounds like a lot when I say that to people, but the first 24 hours, it was very mild. I had contractions throughout that whole first night, but I was also just watching a movie and laying in bed and playing on my phone a little bit. And those contractions are very, very early, when you can do normal tasks and you're very comfortable, and, you know, you can still have conversations. And so going into the second time, I definitely am going to have a better awareness of that one at least, and to know that, you know, I really should have tried to get some sleep, and that is not what I did. You know, you get excited and you get antsy, and I ended up not sleeping a wink that entire first night. So my biggest focuses for that same day is I got adjusted. A lot of you guys know that I'm a chiropractor and I work with women going through pregnancy, going through postpartum, all the fun things. And I'm such a huge proponent for making sure your body is balanced, your body is ready, your body is very, you know, in tune with that process. So I made sure that I got adjusted that day, got my body all ready and all set for labor. And then I got ready for bed. And once again, my contractions kicked into gear right at the time I normally go to sleep. So it very much didn't want me to go to bed. And so I went an entire second night of not sleeping. And like I said, looking back, that is my biggest thing that I'm hoping to change going into this next birth, is I really want to try to prioritize at least taking naps, or like small amounts of sleep, anything that I can get. And my biggest thing is I get so excited, and it's hard to turn your excitement off when baby's coming. But you really need rest. I mean, oh my goodness, by the time I get to the end of the story, I was so tired. I was very sleepy. So I do wish I had taken the time to try and get a nap and try and relax. The second night that I had my contractions, they were a lot more intense than the first night. they still were, I could still have a conversation. And I had some phone calls with my midwife, just checking in of where we were, what I was feeling, what was going on timing wise with my contractions. And everything was still kind of just slowly moving along, which was fine. It's just that I, normally would have been sleeping at that time. And the second night, those contractions were much more intense, and I could not have slept through those if I had wanted to. And I wish I had slept through the ones the night before, because I would have been able to sleep through those. After a while, my midwife did come and do a physical check-in with us as she started to feel that I had really started to make some good progress. And when she came to check on us, that was when we found out she had 3 active labors all going on at the same time. So when you work with a midwife, they try very hard to space them out so that, they can be present for every single birth. But oftentimes, birth happens when birth happens. And all 3 of us were kind of having babies at times that weren't necessarily expected. So we all just timed it for the same weekend. Now, because of this, she called in backup midwives, and they were able to come a couple hours later when I was, much more progressed along with my labor, and they were able to actually help deliver my baby. And that's one of those things that you just have to mentally prepare yourself for, that it's okay if things shift right in the heat of things, It's not the time to panic. And I was so at ease with backup midwives. I had no issues at all with it, even though it was 2 midwives I had never met before. But I know that they know what they're doing. I was just so thankful that we had help here. Help had arrived before baby had, quite a bit before baby, because, first-time moms, every pregnancy is different, but a lot of first-time moms, pregnancy or your labor just kind of takes a while. At one point, we noticed that, things were just still kind of stalling along. They were just hanging in there. And the longer it just kept progressing, but not actually progressing, I was just getting really tired. So we started to come up with some ideas of what are some things that can maybe help my body. I love to be in the bathtub. Being in the bathtub is just so comfortable for me. It's soothing for me. And it's just a happy place for me. So that's where we decided I would go, is to hang out in the bathtub for a little while and just see what happens. And I'm gonna have to put timestamps up. I highly recommend getting a transcript of your birth, if they don't automatically give that to you, of just timings of when different things happened. Because when you're in labor, you think you know what's happening when. And when you go back to tell the story, I remember I was telling it back to my husband, and he was like, that is not how long that took at all. He's like, this is what actually happened. And I was very caught off guard until I read the transcript, and I was like, man, my sense of time was completely warped. So I highly recommend, getting that timestamp of when you were doing different things and see how it compares to what your memory says you were doing. And I'm curious if they line up. So I hung out in the bathtub for a while. I'll have to look at the transcript of actually how long. And one thing that I did while I was in there is I did eat some small snacks, and I was perfectly open to eating snacks throughout my entire labor. Everybody's situation is going to be different when it comes to what they, can or can't do with food. But I was very adamant that snacks were going to happen, because I am the type who needs to eat all the time or I get cranky. And during labor, though, I wouldn't say that I had an appetite. I wasn't craving meals that second day. I just needed some energy. I needed an energy boost because I was behind on sleep. I was getting very worn down of trying to, work my way through contractions, and, it had just quite a bit of time had passed. So those small snacks were really what sustained me. And it was the littlest things. I ate a scoop of peanut butter at one point, or I tried to eat a clementine. And every time I would try to eat anything, even these small snacks, usually within about 5 minutes, I would throw it back up. And I know that sounds unpleasant, but actually every time I got sick, I ended up throwing up 5 times during my labor, and they were all very mild. This isn't like you have a stomach bug. This is just like what you just ate just kind of comes back up, and it's very quick. It's over in just a minute. But every time that happened, I could really feel, so you know, like when you heave, I could really feel it pushing my baby down. I felt like every time I threw up, my baby got a little bit closer to being born. And it just felt like progress to me, and it was great progress. And I was able to keep that food down long enough that it just gave me little spurts of energy that it helped me make it through the rest of our labor. So while I was in the bathtub, at one point during my contractions, I started to feel like I was peeing my pants. Well, obviously I didn't have pants on because I'm in the tub. But I remember telling the midwife, I was like, I am either peeing and just have lost control of it at this point, or my water has broke. I've never had my water break before, so I don't know what that feels like. I was like, but every time I'm having a contraction, I definitely feel like fluids are leaving my body in the bathtub. So this was around the time we decided that I was going to get out of the bathtub, and we transitioned to the bed. So if you've ever looked into how to set up for home birth, you have your bed set up waterproof. So being on the bed while your water is breaking and everything, it's not, you don't even think twice about it. But then we also laid some liners under me, because I told them, I was like, I kind of feel like I'm peeing my pants here. We might want to put some extra things down. And once we put those liners down, my next contraction definitely felt more fluid come out. Now that I'm out of the tub, I'm for sure. I'm like, all right, there's definitely fluid leaving my body. And we were able to see those fluids were clear, you know, everything was just kind of pushing on its own. And that was a really good sign of labor progressing at this point. We finally hit a point where I was like, all right, we're ramping up, things are happening. So this was around the time that we started to get my birth pool set up and my birth pool ready. And by we, I mean not me. That's what you have a team for. And my husband had already practiced setting it up in advance. Highly recommend. I'll do a whole video on what we did with the home, what we did with the water birth, the birth pool, all the setup, all the things, you know, I'll do a whole video on that. But so they all set it up for me, got it filled with water, got the temperature right. And in the meantime, I was just relaxing on the bed, just working through some contractions, working through some things. And that's when I first started to feel, I could really feel baby engaging down into my pelvis. And I could it was noticeably different. Each time I was having a contraction, I felt like baby was very much within my pelvis at that point. And I was starting to feel, so this is gonna sound intense, and it was the most intense part of my labor, but I could really feel where, so I'm a chiropractor, so I can picture, you know, the entire pelvis and how it's put together. And and it's literally what I was doing while I was giving birth, is I was imagining, you know, what my pelvis exactly was doing, and it was fascinating. But at that point, I felt like it was really, really stretching apart, and I could really feel that stretch right where your hips meet up with your sacrum. You have a joint on both sides, and man, I could really feel, I almost felt like that was just pulling apart, and it felt so dramatic, you know what I mean? You almost feel like your pelvis is just gonna pull apart, but it's not, you know, it's all very normal things that our body's going through. But what felt the best was counter pressure. If you have not looked into counter pressure, I highly recommend looking into it, because that was just the most magical thing I'd ever felt in my life at that point, was to have somebody else come up and apply counter pressure with my hips as I was feeling those, you know, separations. They were just kind of gently pushing back, and it eased my feelings, and it put me in a dramatic different level of comfort. So that's what I lived for the next, I'll have to look at the timestamps, but for a good amount of time, all I cared about was counter pressure. I wanted somebody right next to me. I didn't care who it was, but somebody was gonna push on my hips, because you try and do it yourself and you can kind of do it yourself a little bit, but it is so much easier to have somebody else helping with that pressure and someone else to just be an extra hand on deck. So at that point, we had all hands on deck. We had half the team setting up the pool. Someone was making sure my hips were happy. And then we were working our way towards getting in the birth pool. It was so nice just to get into the water. I didn't know how I was going to feel and where I was going to want to be to give birth, but getting in the water, it was just so soothing and so relaxing. The one downside is that it does have to stay hot. You try and keep the water in the tub at body temperature. And I was already so hot because, you're going through all this hard work of trying to, literally push a baby out. At that point, we weren't pushing, but you're working through all these feelings of baby coming out of your body, and you are warm. I run warmer. I like to be, I like the air to be cranked up. I like to be cooler. And I was very warm in the hot birth pool, but it wasn't going to deter me from being in it. Even though I was hot in the birth pool, it's still exactly where I wanted to be. It was so comforting. The lighting was perfect. Everything just felt so soothing. And so I very much felt in my element. And I was completely tuned in to just myself, and I didn't care who else was around or what they were doing. At that point, I was just, essentially closing my eyes most of the time, just feeling my body. You try and relax all of your muscles through those contractions, and it is very active work. You do have to, each contraction, remind your body to relax. Remind yourself just to breathe through it, because the better you relax, the better your body works through that and progresses. You don't want to fight against it. So in the birth pool, I started on all fours, and while I was still having that feeling of needing the counter pressure, the all fours was the position that felt the best. And it really helped me work through that, and it helped someone have access to my hips really well so that they could apply that counter pressure. But eventually, it very much moved past that feeling of feeling like my hips were going to come apart. We kind of progressed past that, and I got to a point where I didn't need the counter pressure anymore. When you're in the moment, you feel like it's never going to end, but it does. And you move to the next phase. And the next phase was when I first started to feel the urge to push. And, at this point, I'll have to look at the time, but we're more than 20 hours into this, and I had never felt the urge to push during any of that time. But this was very, you don't question it. I don't know how to explain it, but I just knew. And I remember telling my midwife, I was like, I feel like I should be pushing at this point. It feels different. And at that point, somewhere around there, my sense of time, like I said, is a little bit warped. But she told me, she was like, I want you to feel inside, and I want you to see if you can feel where baby is. And I was like, you want me to what? And she was like, yeah, just feel up inside, and I want you to see if you can feel baby. And I remember I put my hand, my finger into the birth canal, and I could feel my baby's head. I could feel the top of it. And that was so reassuring, because you feel like you're just going to be doing this forever at some point. And I was like, oh my goodness, we are getting close. I was only, I want to say this far, like an inch in, and I could feel her head. And I was like, she's right there. We're so close. And that was such a cool moment. I remember I was just like, that might be the coolest thing I've ever felt in my life. I can feel how close she is. This is crazy. So then that's when we really ramped up of working through those contractions, and with each contraction, working through using my breath to, kind of help baby transition the way that baby knows how to do. And I'll have to look at the timestamp of how long. I believe we pushed for under an hour. And first time moms, I feel like pushing for right around an hour is a really good place. The only tough part for me is I was almost 2 days, like 48 hours into being awake. And I was very much feeling that full hour. And I think I honestly fell asleep for a second between two contractions, between pushes. I just nodded off for a quick second. That's how tired I was. And, fatigue is a real thing when you're in labor. You really have to try and prioritize rest if you can get it. And I remember looking at my midwife, and I looked right at her and I was like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this. And thank goodness for her. She looked right back at me, so strong and so stern. And she goes, "You already are." And that's when it first, really hit me. I was like, one, I don't think there's any going back. I think we're in it. And I was like, two, she's right. I'm already doing this, and we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to see where it goes. We're going to make it. I'm not going to fall asleep. I'm not going to be too tired. We've got this. So that was such a good moment. And that's why it's so important to know, who your provider is, and to know that they're going to be headstrong and they're going to tell you exactly what you need to hear when you need to hear it. I don't want someone to be like, okay, let's give up. No, look me in the eye and be like, you've got this. There's no other option. But shortly after that, baby was born, and we were able to immediately put her up on my chest while we're still in the water. And one of the most amazing moments of my entire life was, her dad was right behind me, and her little hand grabbed his finger. And then as she's holding his finger, that's when we both watched her, take her first breath out of the water. And it was just, I think it might have been the most magical moment of my life, to watch someone literally just take their first breath and, just breathe life into their body. And it was incredible to experience that. And literally the second you have the baby, you forget all about the pain. And I know you hear that, and it's like a story, and it's like, oh, I don't know about that. But no part of my mind was thinking about pain once I had her on my chest. I was euphoric. I was on cloud 9, and it was just, I remember thinking in that moment, I was exhausted. I was so tired. I couldn't even sit myself up. I needed someone else to assist me. But all I could think about was, man, I can't wait to do that again. That was incredible. I have to do this again. And shortly after that, I stayed in the water for a few minutes just while my midwife did some checks with my uterus, checked everything out, made sure everything was moving the way that we wanted it to. And then everybody kind of helped me up, and we transitioned back to the bed and laid down in bed. And I got to I'm still holding my daughter at this point. She's on my chest, and she's still attached to the umbilical cord. And at that time, my placenta was still inside. Once we got on the bed, I'll have to look at the time, but shortly after that, I was able to birth the placenta. For me, that wasn't a painful process. I know a lot of people say that it feels like, birthing another baby. Everybody's feelings are going to be different. I don't know if I was just so euphoric from having the baby at this point that nothing fazed me, literally nothing. And I remember I could feel it coming out, and I was honestly more fascinated than anything, because anatomy fascinates me. It doesn't freak me out or weird me out. So we put the placenta, we have, when you prep for home birth, you have bowls ready for different for different things, and one of them is to put the placenta in. So we put it in that, and we left her attached to it. So it was just so cool to, you could literally like see the cord and see the blood like still pulsing through it, and to see that color. And we left it until the cord ran white, and that takes some time, you know. I was in no hurry whatsoever. We were going to go as slow as possible, let that, you know, kind of work through its own process. I want all of that blood, all of that good stuff transitioning to my baby if we have the opportunity. And then my husband was able to cut the cord. Once we got her cord cut and we went through, that was around the time that the midwife started doing some of their basic checks. They're checking weight, they're checking, you know, all of her measurements, starting to just go through a couple of the basics. But then very soon after that, we transitioned to breastfeeding for the first time, or just getting that first latch, you know. Just having baby kind of work through that process. And I'm not going to post that picture because that's a very personal picture, but it is one of my favorite photos ever, you know, of that first time that she and I bonded like that. And I highly recommend having someone on hand who can take pictures of moments like that, because I'm going to cherish that photo forever. Like my face, I have the happiest smile I think I've ever seen in any picture. Just, you know, you've done so many things at this point, and I was literally euphoric for all that time that we're working through all these things. And in every photo, I just look, you can tell that I'm very much feeling euphoria. And so that was pretty much how we rounded it out, you know. From there, there's a million stories going into your first week of adventures, even your first night of adventures. But for the most part, that was our full first home birth story. And even though there was chaos, and even though there were things that shifted, and even though it took 2 days, I can't wait to do it again. You know, I'm so excited that we're going to be doing it again here soon. If you're new to my channel, stick around, because I will have another birth story video coming up. I'm not going to say exactly when, because I don't know exactly when, but I do plan this time around, I'm going to make a video about it very shortly after the birth, so that it's all fresh in my mind, and we're so excited for it. So if you have a birth coming up, or if you're thinking about home birth, or even if you're not thinking about home birth and you're just nervous about birth, just know that it could be the most incredible thing you ever experience. And it's okay to look forward to it and be optimistic and to hope for the best. And, you know, I truly hope that you do get that story that you want. And, you know, ours wasn't perfect. It was crazy and wild, but there's beauty in that, you know, that, you know, you don't want perfect. Perfect is kind of boring. You want some chaos, at least a little bit. But yeah, that's our birth story. And here pretty soon, I'll have another one for you. So thanks for sticking around.